Hi everyone and welcome to the Desteni I Process live Google Hangout. We do Hangouts here from the Desteni I Process YouTube channel every Thursday, and you can watch us either here on YouTube or on our Google Plus page, and you can actually participate actively in the discussions. I'll explain that in a moment. Last week we started a new series of Hangouts where we started focusing on education and studying support. And in this particular Hangout, we're going to discuss the topic of vocabulary, why and how vocabulary is so important, and then also how and why vocabulary is not being effectively taught or understood in our school systems, what the consequences of that is and are, and then how we can support ourselves to develop an expansive vocabulary and why we should do that and what the outcome of such a process could be. And to discuss this, we have invited two participants. One is Victor, my partner in crime here from Sweden. Hi, Victor.
Hello.
And the other is Mike McDonald from Canada. Hi, Mike.
Hey, guys.
And as always, as I was mentioning before, you can participate actively in the discussion. If you go to our Google Plus page, there is a box where you can type in your comments or your questions, and we will feature them live here on the Hangout. We'll be talking for about 40 minutes, so if you want to ask a question or post a comment, please do it within that time frame. If you do miss it, you can always put comments on the YouTube recording of this Hangout. So it will be recorded after this live session. If you're watching this live on YouTube, you have to click where it says be part of the conversation over in the lower left corner, and that will take you to our Google Plus page. All right, so let's get started. I'd like that we, just to kick off the Hangout, talk a little bit about why vocabulary is so important, because it's something that we've been discussing a lot in Desteni, in the Desteni I process, which is of course also what this Hangout is about. And through the Desteni tools, vocabulary and words in particular is a very important point. So if we start with you, Mike, what is your perspective on why vocabulary is so important?
Well, words are the basis of our world here. I mean, if you have a look that our effectiveness in being able to communicate about anything in a particular language has to do with our usage of words. I mean, the very fact how we're talking now, we're using our words. If you look at any particular profession, it's a specific body of words. How we exist, all the makeup of our body is a relationship of parts which all have words associated to it. So, I mean, words, it's the dynamics of everything here. And our effectiveness with words really creates the overall beingness of our character here, because our expression is very much in tangent with our usage of words. Another example, I guess you could say, is you know, if you look at particular computers or machines, how they are designed and they're coded is to operate within, you know, particular applications, and those coding is like a language in and of itself. It's, you know, it's its own kind of word language, whether it be numbers or symbols. It's really the basis of communication.
Yeah, absolutely. And I would also say that in relation to communication, that once we start investigating vocabulary and the importance of words, we can also see that in disagreements or misunderstandings or conflicts, it almost always comes down to vocabulary and how we learn vocabulary, which is something that we'll also be discussing in this Hangout. But I want to go to you first, Victor. Do you want to give us perspective as well on why vocabulary is so important?
Yeah, I would say that words are the building blocks of our character, as Mike also was into. And that, you know, for example, if we take a subject in school, and let's say it's a completely new subject with new words, that if you go and read a book in that subject containing those new words, you won't be able to understand anything of it. I mean, compare that to reading that book when you do have the words integrated and an understanding of them, then you'll be able to comprehend the book and also use the information in your world. And it's the same, you know, with real life, that when we walk into a new situation, for example, facing a new relationship, a new person that has somewhat of an erratic personality, and we have no vocabulary to sort of understand and comprehend where they're coming from, it makes it difficult for us to direct the situation. And so words are really like these tools, and that when we have an effective toolbox, then we're able to live more effective lives.
So it basically gives us access to the world. The more expansive vocabulary we have, the more access we have to the world around us, even to ourselves.
Yeah.
So if vocabulary is so important as we say, I'd like to ask you two questions. The one being, why is it that it's not being taught and understood effectively in schools? I mean, I can share a perspective as a teacher, meaning that I do see that it's not being effectively taught or understood in schools. It's more seen as a, you know, like it's kind of random the way that vocabulary is taught. But then also, how is it not taught, or how is it being used in schools or in the education system? What would you say to this, Mike?
Well, I mean, not to sound too conspiratorial or anything, but the design of the education system, if you look back into the history of public education, it really stems from the development of bringing farmer children into the city so that they could be educated to get factory jobs. So the design of the public education system isn't necessarily so much about self-empowerment, self-development, having an expansive toolbox for the most effective abilities and potential to create here and shape your life and improve to the overall betterment of all life here. It's very much the opposite. It's very much to perpetuate the pillars we have as the established ways about these systems exist, whether it be, you know, law, economics, healthcare, medicine, science, the way it exists, so much so. Yeah, so that's how things are existing right now within the word dynamic. So there's kind of a suppression on it, and I mean, most people are just kind of, you know, like passive participants in this whole play, meaning that, you know, we are products of the product, most of us, in the specific sense that, you know, most people go to public school. That's the majority, and so most people become, you know, a particular product of their public school upbringing, and thus they, you know, fill the position as the particular pillars in society, and it just kind of perpetuates itself. So, for instance, you know, most people teaching in the public education system are, you know, particular products of the education system, and they went through the specific training, and so it's kind of like an extensive regurgitation outflow that we have is how the system function, in that there's, you know, a very specific structured curriculum agenda that you follow, and, you know, you're not supposed to deviate too much from the plan, the framework.
Yeah, I know that Victor has actually researched this point a lot in terms of what the kids actually learn in school, and you were quite surprised at how few words that they learn, how few new words is introduced. I'd like to ask you that. But what you were saying, Mike, it brought up a memory when I was an assistant teacher that exactly illustrates this point in terms of how education is very limited, and it doesn't in any way harness the true potential that is within us as human beings, and specifically in children. And of course that's also because the adults, the teachers themselves, are a product of that exact same system, so they don't even know their own potential. And so I was sitting in a like a, you know, these circles that the kids have with the teacher directing the kids, and they're sitting there in a circle, and this was a preschool class, and they were singing a song that had extremely meaningless words. It was like one of those, how do you call it, nonsense songs, and it didn't really make sense. And then one of the kids were like asking, but what does that word mean? You know, he was trying to make meaning of it and contextualize it for himself. And the teacher, she just shrugged it off, and she gave him like this half-assed answer, where I could see in that moment that it actually created the potential for the child to not understand the word correctly. That because she hadn't, you know, there was no time to actually say, okay, let's look at this word. What does that actually mean? Let's look it up in a dictionary. You know, let's look at the history of that word. You know, because as a teacher, imagine if you had to do that with every word, and you have 30 students, and everyone is asking. So then it becomes very easily, you know, these half-assed answers, or these, you know, you'll learn when you grow older, or you don't have to know that now, which basically leaves us with an incomplete and a faulty vocabulary where we don't understand things correctly. Is that something that you can relate to?
Well, I mean, I'm not asked like that a question to my teacher, what does this mean? I would more say that I can relate to the point that the public school system has never really facilitated my pace of learning or my interest in learning, and that it's been, I mean, it's a very square system. You know, it is for one kind of person, for one personality. And for example, I was more into subjects like history and societal knowledge and stuff like that, and the current school system doesn't have, you know, roots where the different personalities can explore their aptitudes. So in that way I can relate to it, that you don't...
But you want to share like what you discovered when you started exploring and researching the words that kids actually learn in school?
Yeah, so it was in relation to a program that I'm working with, where I'm building word lists, Swedish word lists, that children are then supposed to walk through and integrate from about 6 years old until they are maybe 19. And then I had an idea of complementing these word lists with the subjects that are taught in school. So I then went through the various books that, you know, hold the subjects and the words that are in the curriculum. And it was fascinating to see that, for example, in the book that is directed towards children from maybe 7 to 9 years old, there is a certain range of words, maybe 70, 50 words that are new, that a child have to learn. But then when I, you know, was done with that, I found the words, and I went to the next level of books from children then, from 11 to 13 maybe. It was fascinating that, I mean, the exact same words were repeated, and then maybe there were added 30 words. And that's how it was with all subjects. For example, history, they went through, you know, you've all heard about this in school. First we were Neanderthals, then we were Homo sapiens, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah, and then the Stone Age, then the...
Yeah, and that came through in every grade. It was like insane. Why are we going through that? Yeah.
But playing the devil's advocate, Mike, if I'm to direct this question to you, couldn't we say that, well, it has to be repeated? You know, that is the history. That is what kids need to learn. Would you agree with that?
Well, just in listening to everything that's been said, and just kind of looking at the design of the education system and the way it exists, you know, it just got me thinking just now about how really the point of it, I see, is just really to groom people into the point of labor. You know, to get kind of complacent with you're going to, once you finish going to the school where you go from 9 to 5 or 8 to 3, whatever it is, basically the education system is really no more than a labor system, so to speak. And your pay in the education system is your grade, so to speak. Because based on like your grading, you know, your parents may reward you if you get good grades or whatnot, or in the education system itself, you'll get more privileges per se if your grades are better, that you'll have more opportunity later on. And those opportunities are based on, you know, your complacency in sticking to the work that's put here for you to do, and not really, you know, questioning the work, but just shut up, do the work. If you do the work good, we'll reward you good. And you know, it's really quite bizarre when you think about it that way, that we've allowed a system like this to exist for so long. Because I mean, so much of our life is just kind of abdicated, really. You know, in the structure that, I mean, school, I think, has also justified the public education system so much so is because once you've become a product of the product, you know, you now don't have time to look after your own children because you've moved on to the next phase of the education system, where you've now engaged yourself into a particular labor position, for the most part, that takes up almost all of your time. So now, you know, you need a daycare essentially, but it's, you know, it's justified as more than a daycare. It's the education.
Yeah, it's interesting also considering the irony of this very trending concept of lifelong learning, which essentially means, you know, lifelong enslavement to a limited system, you know, where you have to follow this like very narrow path. So it's quite fascinating to start ponder. We have a question or a comment from Martin, and he's asking, or he's saying, when I was in high school here, I could see that this is only a matter of time and passion, because in math class we had 4 more class time, or maybe it means 4 times more class time than with other topics, and the teacher take the time and be specific and explain. So is it really the system? Like, based on what I understand that he's saying that having proper education would really just be a matter of having enough time and having a teacher that is passionate and dedicated. Is that something you guys would agree with?
You mean, can you say it again? Or maybe you can answer it, man.
Okay. I mean, obviously, you know, like let's not mistake that there is a place for education. You know, there's particular things you need to know, like words, for example. Having a very expansive vocabulary is going to be supportive. Being able to do math effectively is going to be supportive. So, yes, having passionate teachers, I would say, is important. I very much do question the structure, that the time allotment and the focus, that it's more of a complacency point, that now you will learn on this. If you don't get it, you know, whatever, you can have more time. It's obviously cool to have people move at their own pace. So, because when you put, you know, a resistance point on to somebody's learning or demand, so to speak, it's, you know, it's going to create a reaction within the participant where they're going to, you know, resist the resistance, so to speak, and then they're going to persist in having conflict about that particular point. I just say one more thing in relation to the point is that if anyone is not familiar with John Taylor Gatto, he's a very fascinating person to investigate, look at, who used to be a teacher within the public education system and was a bit of a rebellion, so to speak, in regards that he just tossed the, you know, typical curriculum out the window. He worked with mostly grade 7 and 8 students and basically just encouraged them to find something they're interested in, and he would support them, guide them into investigating all avenues and really supporting them and utilizing all the basic competencies that are involved with education, whether it be, you know, math, vocabulary, spelling, writing skills, and beyond that, the interpersonal skills of a human being, where he oftentimes would encourage them to, leave the class and go do these things outside of the classroom. And he said, "Don't worry, I'll cover for you," or get the parents to sign a note. He'd just make the note up with him and the parent without telling the principal or whatever, and just kind of conduct his own experiments with the children. And this guy, John Taylor Gatto, had tremendous results. He worked with some of the poorest children in New York State and had them going into competitions and beating people from the top private schools, as well as he had a lot of his students apply to college and universities earlier. He said, "You don't really need to go to high school in order to get into college and university if you can prove to them that you're at that standard." And so, yeah, he really challenged in a lot of regards and showcased that you don't have to follow this, standardized paradigm, so to speak, of how to effectively learn and educate someone, and that by encouraging someone to follow something they're interested in, you can kind of connect all the rest of the dots from an equal and one starting point.
Yeah, you could say he basically hacked the education system and then showed children how to do the same. And he was actually, or is, to a certain extent, you can go and research, actually against the public education system altogether and a strong advocate for homeschooling.
Right.
But that's an entirely different discussion that we should also have at some point. But
For sure.
returning to the topic of vocabulary,
Yes.
Victor, in relation to the consequences of vocabulary not being effectively understood by adults and teachers or the people who educate children in their daily lives, what can you share some of the consequences that happen to us or that we are exposed to from vocabulary not being understood?
Yeah, I mean, one consequence that I'm able to see, and that have sort of an insight that have emerged through studying law, which is it's a subject that is based very much almost on a form of code, because at least in Sweden, and I know also, for example, in America and in Great Britain, the law is written in such a old language that it's, I mean, for the normal person, and here I'm talking about someone that is actually, have quite a average intellect and, do understand things properly if explained, pedagogic manner, it will almost be impossible for them to penetrate, the law and understand what it means. And it's, I mean,
yeah, when you say topics to me, for example, I don't understand anything. It sounds like Chinese to me.
Yeah, and it's because it is Chinese in a way, because it's a different language. And so here, what is cool then to look at in terms of vocabulary is how, I mean, the law has been written in this way because those that write the law are the privileged. It's those that have, they have afforded the law education, they have gone the right roads, they have been taught at the courts, they have sort of had this vocabulary integrated, and then they are, assisting the government to write the laws. And what happens is a form of, very effective social control, where most of the population is locked out from understanding what is going on, and they'll, they can't consult the laws and understand what is written here and how that affects me. So yeah, denying people effective vocabulary is an effective way to control them, to create a hierarchy in society where a few will have the power and the rest will, solely live their lives to survive, in essence.
Yeah, that's a very good, and it's the same with the medical system as well, where we don't actually know or understand the ins and outs of our own body, and so when we are confronted with an illness and we have to go seek out professional help, it's very difficult to disagree or to be critical towards what a medical professional says, because they're the expert. They have the language. I don't understand what they're saying. But I also see it a little bit in the context of almost like it's a computer game where you have to unlock the next level, right, to get to the next level. And it's the same way with vocabulary. You know, in order for you to take a law education, you have to have gone to high school to a certain degree, or at least have the vocabulary that is equivalent of what you learn at high school to be able to even follow a law education. And in order to go to high school, you have to have had a relatively successful primary education. And so if you remain at that level, like if you never graduate from high school, it's kind of like being in a computer game and being stuck on the same level. And you don't have the keys that will help you unlock the next level, which is the proper or the effective vocabulary, which then creates a society of inequality, and where, you know, we talk about this equal opportunity as though everyone universally or naturally has an equal opportunity to advance in life. But exactly like you're saying, there are vast proportions of the population that are locked out from advancing because they don't have that key, and they should have had it, you know, even before. And we see that with, even in preschool education, where children from more affluent families, like already at the age of 2, they have like a vastly superior vocabulary to those from more impoverished families. Did you want to add anything to this, Mike?
Okay. So, I mean, words, and Victor was speaking about the law from the world system perspective. Another cool perspective to take about words and the law is that, you know, our relationship with words really forms the law of our individual being here, which is interesting in and of itself because, well, like we've been mentioning here, you know, words create, shape our world, our expression, our character of ourself, and within that, you know, we can have particular relationships with words. So it's one thing for us to have an extensive vocabulary, and, you know, this may be somewhat of a problem that exists. Well, it is a problem that exists today, where you can have, you know, a particularly extensive vocabulary, but the associations you have with the particular words are not necessarily in proper alignment or whatnot. So you have these words, and thus, as a result, they're misused, so to speak, or you're not being able to live the words as a self-expression of yourself, which makes them as tools to be, you know, less than optimum in their effectiveness and your potential to express yourself as the living of these words here.
Yeah, absolutely, and I'm glad that you said this, Mike, because I wanted to ask you a little bit more also about you could say, the internal or the personal consequence of having, could we say that our vocabularies in a way become contaminated or become tainted because it is, you know, so randomly kind of thrown around, and not being carefully considered or carefully taught?
Who are you asking?
I'm asking you.
Absolutely. This reminds me of a point. Okay. Yeah, so this reminds me of a point that I was sharing with you earlier, or the other day, where I learned the lesson early on from my parents, I believe. Sticks and stones may break my bones, but names will never hurt me. And, you know, when I first heard that, I was kind of like, well, yeah, okay, why are you even telling me this? That's like saying the sky is up and the ground is down. Like, yeah, I know rocks, you know, are physical things, and at that time, you know, it was like words aren't physical. That was my perspective at the time. So obviously, how could a word hurt me? But then, you know, in the schoolyard where, you know, the kids have recess time to basically be free to muck around, if you will. That's where, you know, I first learned the whole game of, or the bullying, I guess, of name calling, where you call each other names and, you know, the swear words, and how these these words typically carry particular energetic charges, and that you're kind of hit like with those words, and it's kind of like a zap, and basically it's like the game tag, freeze tag we play. You go around zapping each other with how you're speaking to one another, and it's kind of funny because we don't really understand how energy works, and we're creating like all this disparity of high and low experiences, and so you want to perpetuate as much high as you can get, and all the while never really being explained that how your body as an organism, a music maker so to speak, is harnessing this potential within the sounding of the word, and your body is the vessel that's basically laboring that experience with that word relationship, whether you speak it yourself or another speaks it to you, and your relationship to hearing that particular word. And that in and of itself is fascinating because the point and recognition of how sensitive we are to our environment around us, and how we are responsible for how we're relating to that which is in our own environment, and even just the point of self-reflecting on, okay, so if I really take what so-and-so says personally, that can really impact and influence my functioning or my movement of myself. And this then exposes and showcases, exemplifies, if you will, how media works, television, movies, in terms of the vocabulary and the word usage. Like if you look, for example, at the average movie produced today and the vocabulary used and the amount of words used in telling a story versus the average movie in the 1950s or 1960s, you'll see that exactly. You'll see that the vocabulary was much greater back then versus it is now, where we so much replaced the usage of words for more action, violent conflict, whatnot. Like an interesting example is to watch a movie that's been redone in recent years versus the original that was done way back. You'll find that the plot and substance of the dialogue was much greater in the original versions.
Yeah, in relation to what you were saying about that whole sapping on the schoolyard, it reminded me of how, and this is something that I've experienced personally, that also goes to show the problem that comes in when we don't effectively understand vocabulary or words, which is in the context of having a lot of derogatory words or swear words being specifically female, like bitch, for example, or even the word douchebag has a specific female. I mean, you can go and look it up if you're interested.
I do.
But there are a lot of words that are very directed towards females that males will even use towards each other. Don't be such a girl, for example. I actually wrote an entire blog about this because as I went back through my memories, it hit me how much that has actually affected me throughout my life, that I had subconsciously, because it wasn't something I was actively thinking about, but I had subconsciously defined the fact that I'm a female because of such words and such, like don't be such a girl or you run like a girl. I had actually taken that personally in seeing myself as inferior and as almost like being embarrassing and something that is to be ashamed of, thus causing me to always look up to males and wanting to be more like a man, and not wanting these female qualities. And that is quite interesting because something that I've noticed is that it's such an integrated, and now especially it's such a normalized part of our vocabulary to use specific derogatory names. And I mean, the same goes for all kinds of other stigmas like faggot or racial names. And of course, the point is not that that I was hurt, because that is also something that, oh, here's the doggy.
Yeah, she wanted to have a sit.
Because I mean, the fact that I took, because that's something that I realized through writing myself out in this blog, was that, well, I took it personally. I accepted the premise that when you use the word bitch, which is a name of a female dog, it is criticizing me as a female, so therefore I'm less than, or I am not good enough. I accepted that premise, so I basically went ahead with it and went along with it and said, okay, so I agree that being a female is embarrassing and shameful, and it's something that you shouldn't want to identify with. And so, I mean, that just goes to show how, and that's just, one point out of my entire vocabulary, or in the environment of the vocabulary that I'm surrounding myself with. So in relation to this point, both on this personal level that we've been talking about now, and then also the systemic level that we talked about previously, where an unequal vocabulary creates an unequal society, what can we do? What can be done to change this? What would you say, Victor?
Yeah, well, on a systemic level, I think it's important that to really look the entire public schooling system. And a solution that I see that would be, I think it would be quite effective, is actually homeschooling. Because one of the public school is that the child doesn't get sufficient interaction with an adult, and that is a reason and cause as to why they don't integrate a proper and effective vocabulary.
All right, very cool. And Mike, how about on a personal level? Like I was just talking about this particular experience where you could say that female-related words have become sort of contaminated, or as you said, charged with the negative energy inside of me, so that it actually affects how I see myself. What can be done in such situations? What can we do? And I mean, don't we also walk around maybe not even knowing how limited we are because of the way our vocabulary is? What can we do about that?
Well, something that I've done, and I know you guys have implored it yourself, implied it, is the process of self-forgiveness, where you purify your vocabulary. It's really a point of self-reflection, in the sense that you basically, well, you can write it down, for instance, your relationship with a particular word, and you can make specific note of the energetic relationship you have to a word. So if it's, for example, negatively charged, you can basically walk a process of giving yourself a release from such a condition you've imposed upon yourself by changing the nature of your relationship through forgiving yourself. And it's really as simple as giving yourself permission, so to speak, to let go, change the charge you put against yourself, so to speak.
Yeah, and we'll place a couple of links in the description below the YouTube video once the video is uploaded, because we did a hangout a while back about redefining words and how you can essentially take a word and redefine it and sort of take back power in a way from having these positive and negative experiences in relation to a word and start living the word for what it is, but even integrate words into your lives that maybe you have not yet lived. So could you share a little bit about, because we're almost at the end of the hangout, but could you share a little bit about what you have experienced in terms of how have you benefited from walking this process of purifying your vocabulary?
I would say that it's made my life more fulfilling and more substantial. And I could, for example, it's been a lot of that many words have a much more expansive definition than what I've come to see and how I've come to live the word. For example, the word care. I mean, initially and growing up, this word care would sort of extend to, me, for example, caring for my body, exercising and stuff like that. Now I've begun to walk this process and begun to, sort of investigate these words, I can see that, the word care is really a much more expansive point that can be lived in a multitude of ways. And for example, care can be lived in relation to doing the dishes. And I mean, then it's fascinating to ask yourself, okay, but how can I live care in doing the dishes? Well, it's the way you, for example, touch the glass, that you're very you're careful and caring that you don't break the glass, that you don't handle it with too hastily. And then when you take the soap in and you start to wash it, you're careful and precise that you get all the dirt. So that's been a fascinating point. Also, not just purifying, but also realizing that many of the words I've lived in my life are much more expansive and not as biased as I initially believed them to be.
Interesting. So it's almost like it goes from being one-dimensional, either one-dimensional or completely polarized, to becoming alive in a way. That the word becomes alive, it becomes rich, full, and expansive.
Mm.
How about you, Mike? How has walking this process benefited you in your life?
Well, it's been amazing, really. It's just opened up so much for me in terms of how I'm able to express myself, how I'm able to play within whatever it is I'm doing, in terms of how I look and perceive things. Because, like you said, it's so multi-dimensional in that life regard. Because there's just so many ways you can look at a point. Like if you consider a point to be like the Earth, the globe, and you can look at it from this angle, that angle, that angle. There's so many different angles, and they all encompass that one point. So I really, really enjoy playing with this at all, as it's kind of like music in a way, that our words and our vocabulary are our notes, as well as our instruments. I mean, our body is kind of like the instrument, and that's the expression of our playing with it. But also just in the way we say it, because there's so many ways, to even convey the same message in various tonalities, expressions, and so yeah, always whenever I start I begin a new relationship with a word, where let's say I'm learning something new and I'd never really considered that word or had neglected it from my radar, so to speak. I kind of allow myself to get intimate with the word, whether it's just looking at the word itself and writing it out and playing with the phonetics of the word, and just looking at the accepted definitions of how the word exists now, and kind of reflecting outward from that and seeing how I can relate it to the understanding and realization I have about so many other things that exist, and see if I can even take it and make it more expansive from what's being commonly accepted and allowed with the word. And just kind of within that, I mean, it's a lot of fun.
Yeah, it can really be a lot of fun. So here, before we finish the hangout for today, what are you guys' tips and suggestions for anyone who would like to either work with their own vocabulary, like just finding out, what is this thing with words, and is it really true that my vocabulary is tainted in a way? How do I start discovering that and then begin the process of purification? Or for parents who would like to support their children to actually prevent them from developing a vocabulary that is not clear, that is not specific, that would like to support them to open up all the doors of opportunities and possibilities in this world for them. What would your suggestion be?
I mean, one thing that you can do that is quite fun is that you look in your world and you sort of ask yourself, what would I like to live? What is it that I see I lack, so to speak? Where is it that I like to expand myself? And then you sort of check your world, and then you sort of cook it down to a word. And
can you give an example? What word could that be?
Well, for example, okay, I'm not doing my studies very well, and I would really like to do them quite, more effectively. And I sit and I just read, but I don't really read, and so a word there could be focus. Okay, I want to apply focus here, and then you take that word, put it in front of you, and you sort of write about it.
Like Mike was saying,
yeah,
open it up.
Yeah, open it up. And also, I mean, utilizing self-forgiveness, and that is a tool you can check out on the Desteni website. And you go through the process of releasing energies from the word, and then you redefine it, and you say, okay, focus for me will be that when I read this book and I go into some imagination because I feel that it's so boring, and then I say, no, stop, okay, I'm here and I continue reading this. And so there, you're actually beginning to live a word. And that can be, it's really fun. You can also explore, just take a random word, for example, flippity flop or something. I don't know. And then, check out.
Police car.
Yeah, how can I live police car in my life?
or maybe that wouldn't be so relevant.
Yeah.
All right, let's go to you, Mike. What would be your suggestion for anyone who would like to start working with their own or their child's vocabulary?
Okay, well, I mean, a great opportunity for anyone, and it's something I'm involved with, is TechnoTutor. TechnoTutor, the main program within TechnoTutor, is actually called the Vocabulary Builder. And this works very specifically in a very structured nature in correcting a person's vocabulary as well as building a person's vocabulary. So let's say, for example, you start with a young child. They're introduced to this program. This will help them in a very structured, fun way go through the steps in building their vocabulary in a most effective and efficient manner. And also, the way it's set up, it prevents creating disassociations, meaning incorrect terminology with the word, so that you can, in fact, structure the word as an effective building block within yourself so that it's a strong tool in your ability to express yourself. Now, it works equally as well for people that are older and who already have a well-developed vocabulary, from the perspective that you can kind of go through your word list, and what will come up is it'll show you the way the program is structured, that it works with your mind at the knowingness level. So essentially, if you have any contaminations within your vocabulary, there's a remediation process for you to walk. And the way the program is structured, it's in such a way that it'll test your relationship with the word, and there's basically a foolproof method in place so that you purify your vocabulary, essentially. And it's super fun, easy to use, and everybody who's used it so far that I've witnessed has experienced tremendous results.
Yeah, I mean, I'm using TechnoTutor every day, specifically in the context of learning Swedish, because I'm living in a different country, and am set up to build a life for myself here. And something that I noticed is that once I had committed myself to speaking Swedish every day, that I took like a leap in my vocabulary development of this new language. But then I hit this like plateau where I weren't getting any further, and I didn't really have time to go and study a language course or take these like very extensive courses, and I wasn't kind of getting any further from my conversations with people in my daily life. And something that I noticed once I started using the vocabulary builder is that was because it was the same words being repeated. Now, I'm in a teaching environment, so there are a lot of the same words, like blackboard and student and schedule and stuff like that. Those kind of words, they just repeat and repeat and repeat. So I hear the same words every day. But now that I'm using the vocabulary builder, I have access to the entire Swedish list of words, which means that just like if I was a child learning my native language.
Oh, okay, I'll be right there.
Okay, well,
Sorry.
we're almost done. So just like if I was a child learning a native language, it actually gives me, the expansive potential to learn all kinds of areas that I would have otherwise not have access to unless I had deliberately sought it out. Learning, for example, words in physics. I would have to actually go to the library and find the physics books and look up, the register, for example. So I also find that it's a very smooth and very practical way of really start accelerating that process of expanding one's vocabulary. All right, is there anything else you guys want to say? Any last words? No? How about you, Mike?
Word.
All right. So thank you so much for being here. We're a little bit over time today. We hope that you enjoyed this hangout and that you will be back next week. We're doing a movie night hangout that we do every Friday, and it is going to be on the movie tomorrow, Friday, Snowpiercer, which we actually watched a couple of days ago. It was quite interesting. Have you watched it, Mike?
That's the one with what's his name, Julian Assange.
No.
It's with a train, right?
Oh,
No.
the train one. Yeah. I've seen that. Also.
Yeah, it is a
Okay.
train. Yeah.
They begin at the back of the train, and the train's going around the world. Oh, sorry.
No
Spoiler.
spoilers. Yeah.
Well, whatever. You're gonna find that part out in the first minute or two, anyway.
Yeah, true.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, if you go to the hangout tomorrow, you'll probably get some spoilers as well. So you might as well go and watch the movie now before tomorrow. But anyway, yeah. So definitely suggest to go and watch that.
Yeah, it's a good one.
And otherwise, we will be back next week with more on education and studying support. If you do have any topics that you'd like us to take up here in these hangouts, send us a mail at desteniiprocess@gmail.com. Please don't forget to subscribe to our channel and thumbs up our videos. And we'll be back next week. Thanks. Bye, guys.
Bye.